All right, ladies and gentlemen, happy Monday. Hopefully, you guys had a great weekend. Some nice weather, so to speak. Rainy day yesterday, but hopefully, you guys are all set to go here for a very short week and certainly a fun holiday right down the road here with Thanksgiving on Thursday. So, we do have a short week, which is why I want to take an opportunity today while up at Founders to give you guys kind of a summary of what we talked about last week and also introduce section 3. So last week we left off talking about all of these incidents and acts and events taking place in the colonies, which is going to lead to the tension between the British and the colonists here in North America. The tension is rising. That tea kettle is starting to boil quite a bit. And we saw the example of reality versus perception. All right, the reality of the situation taking place in March of 1770 up in Boston was the colonists and very much instigated and started a conflict with British soldiers. However, Paul Revere's depiction of what happened on the streets of Boston that day became known as the Boston Massacre, a so-called deliberate attack on innocent civilians. But as we had spoken about on Friday, that wasn't really the case. All right, these colonists were heckling these soldiers. They were throwing snowballs and oyster shells at them to a point where, out of self-defense, it sounded as though that the British fired their weapon. And we talked about John Adams, all right, very unpopular for doing his job as a defense attorney to give these soldiers a fair trial. And I think that's important to note as far as John Adams, who would consider himself to be a supporter of the patriot cause. But if his argument was that the colonies should have the right to govern themselves, then why should they start to deprive basic rights that have been given to English citizens since things like the Magna Carta, all right, to which a fair subject to a fair trial and a trial by jury. So that's why he takes the case and ultimately is able to acquit those 9 soldiers of murder, okay, a deliberate killing of these colonists who fell victim of the Boston Massacre. Only 2 of them who admitted during the trial to have fired their weapons were convicted of manslaughter, and their punishment was to have their thumbs branded. So that's going to send shockwaves throughout the colonies. A lot of people believe that those British troops should have been hung for their crimes, murder or not, for what they did. And in reality, what this is going to do, even though these soldiers are acquitted, it's not going to make things better. Okay, certainly not the least. So what we're going to see really is a fallout of not only an increased tension in Boston, not only increased tension between the colonists and the British in Massachusetts, not only that and the same in New England, but really throughout the 13 colonies. If something like this can happen in Boston, what says it wouldn't be able to happen in their own backyards? As a result of the Boston Massacre, it became apparent that the colonists had become very interested in what was going on in each of the different colonies, which is why one of the organizers of the group known as the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams, John Adams's cousin, formed what was known as the Committee of Correspondence. And this group essentially was a secret organization that many colonists would participate in to keep the colonies informed as to what was going on. All right, so it's estimated that approximately 7,000 to 8,000 patriots, all right, colonists who supported the idea of governing themselves, had been associated with this. They are extremely influential in helping to organize different protests and boycotts, but also they were in charge of making sure that letters were sent to the different colonies to keep the colonies themselves informed. All right, so members of the Committee of Correspondence in Massachusetts would be quick to give the colonists in New York updates as to what was going on up in Massachusetts. And likewise, members of the committee in New York were in constant correspondence with those in South Carolina. So this was a way to keep the colonies, again, a little bit more informed. Okay, they worked in the most cases in secret. Okay, they tried to infiltrate these colonial legislatures to try to have a say in what laws were being passed within the colonies. In most cases, a lot of colonists kind of looked to the Committee of Correspondence to try to make sure that things were getting done. One of the things that this committee will be responsible for doing is organizing what is to eventually become the First Continental Congress, which is going to be a meeting specifically in Philadelphia in 1774. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next section. Okay, but Samuel Adams is considered the person there pictured to the right of starting this committee. But most importantly, the big thing for this committee is that it's going to promote colonial unity. This isn't colonial unity to support the British in opposition to the French, like we saw in that Join or Die political cartoon, but it's the idea of promoting a sense of colonial unity, the 13 colonies together going up against the British for all of the things that they have done, all of the acts, the laws that have been passed. By 1770, with the Boston Massacre and the organization of the Committee of Correspondence, we've essentially gotten to a point where after 7 years after the agreement of the Treaty of Paris, the colonists have not gotten a reward. They haven't gotten that pat on the back, as we've spoken about. So by 1770, now most of the colonists, they're not looking for a reward. They're looking for a little bit of revenge. Okay, they want things that the British are not going to give them, but the colonists are going to be quick to demand them. Okay, in regards to the relationship between colony and motherland. So section 3, what I'm going to ask that you guys read tonight, and make sure you have it read for Tuesday's class, Wednesday's class when I get back, is a call to take action, okay? And what we're going to see is that while protests and boycotts, the refusal to buy goods, are working to some degree, Britain hasn't changed their mind as far as the relationship with the colonies. And the Committee of Correspondence, groups like the Sons of Liberty, they want to do something that is going to catch the attention of King George III over in England, Parliament's attention, that may finally get them to the point of making drastic changes in the relationship between the British government and the colonies. Now, while that change is talked about, it takes a few years after the Boston Massacre for the colonists to come up with some sort of idea in regards to showing Britain how upset they are with them. And in 1773, something's going to happen in the colonies that is almost going to pique that group of people's interest as far as turning protest into action. Okay, and we talked about already in 1767 the Townshend Acts being passed, and eventually by 1770 those acts are repealed. However, there is still a tax on tea. Well, through boycotts and the refusal to buy British tea, Britain's losing a lot of money. So Parliament and King George III come up with the idea of passing a new act that essentially is going to benefit one of their most successful companies, all right, that work for the British government, and that company is known as the British East India Company. All right, as you can imagine, it is a British-operated company, okay, that has its ties to India. Okay, and Great Britain had a lot of territory and lands and colonies there in India, and it was in India, okay, where their tea leaves would be exported from, okay, and then shipped to different parts of the English Empire. So what happened during the 1770s is that this company was losing a tremendous amount of money. Colonists were refusing to buy goods. The British knew that they were struggling to compete with the price of smuggled tea. That's why we talked about the writs of assistance. So what England came up with the idea was this. Let's pass the Tea Act, all right? And essentially what the Tea Act is going to do is it's going to drop the price of tea, okay? This company had made a lot of money in years past, and the idea was to continue to help that company. So what they were going to do is essentially allow the British East India Company to ignore the Navigation Acts, which were passed in 1650. One of the Navigation Acts said all products going to the colonies needed to go to England first, okay? But the passing of the Tea Act, England is saying that the ships leaving India can go directly to the colonies. Therefore, their tea won't be taxed, and therefore, okay, the tea is going to be sold in the colonies for a cheaper price. Now, fair, if I was in class, fair or unfair? I would venture to say, dropping the price of tea, pretty fair, okay? What that essentially does, though, in the colonies is it makes the people who have smuggled in tea, okay, their tea now is more expensive, okay? And essentially the colonists say, hey, you're putting these people out of business, okay? This is unfair. This is an act that you're just catering to a group of people, a company that allows them to have a monopoly, all right? Think about the word monopoly for a second. I'm sure many of you have played the game. It doesn't take 5-10 minutes. Sometimes it takes 5-10 hours for that case, all right? The objective of the game for Monopoly is to control the entire board, and that's what essentially what a monopoly is. It's the control on the complete distribution and sale of a particular product. And the British East India Company was the only business in town selling tea. Okay, so what they're allowed to do with the passing of the Tea Act is drop their price. They're not losing out on money, but effectively the idea is in England that this company is going to be able to make a tremendous amount of money. All right, so for argument's sake, the British East India Company, a pound of tea was $1. Now not going to the colonies to be taxed. Now they can sell it for 75 cents. Meanwhile, that smuggler may be selling tea for 80 cents, 90 cents. If they go lower than that price of 75, then maybe it doesn't even make much sense for them to smuggle tea. So it puts them technically out of business. And keep in mind, smugglers are people who are breaking the law. So when word gets out about the Tea Act, are the colonists happy? No. They are upset. They see right through it. They are completely frustrated and angered at the English Parliament for this. All right, these colonial merchants will be unable to compete with the price of tea, and as a result, groups like the Sons of Liberty want to do something to show that the colonists are very upset with the British. It's no longer just about protesting, saying that they don't like it, saying no taxation without representation. It's no longer about boycotting, refusing to buy their goods. What the colonists want to do is really show the British how unhappy they are, which in December of 1773 is going to lead to one of the most famous protests and boycotts of all time. By the winter of 1773, a fallout from the passing of the Tea Act is that people are refusing to buy, even still, British tea, although the price is still cheaper than that of who would have been selling it illegally, so to speak. Thomas Hutchinson, the acting governor of Massachusetts, and specifically of Boston at this time, knowing this, still will demand that ships be brought in hopes that the colonists will decide that they are going to eventually buy the cheaper tea. But the Sons of Liberty are up to no good, and they look at this as a situation to show Great Britain how upset they truly are. So using the cover of night, on the evening of December 16th of 1773, a group of people disguised as Mohawk Indians. Why are they dressing up or disguising themselves? Essentially so that they cannot be pointed out, arrested for a crime, are going to board a British ship and simply take crates of tea. They're not stealing it to sell it. They're not burning it. They're throwing it right into the Boston harbor in what becomes a public spectacle. This is the epitome of turning protest into action. What these members of the Sons of Liberty did on that night in December was they threw 342 cases or crates of tea straight into the Boston harbor. And as you can see from this picture, and I mentioned before, a public spectacle, people knew that this was going on, and the British soldiers that were standing guard at the port of Boston that night knew that they couldn't really their hands were kind of tied right now. All right, with so many people out there and every case of tea that's being thrown into the Boston harbor, they knew that if they were to take action and start arresting people, that there was going to most likely be a riot on their hands. All right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on Wednesday. But nonetheless, 342 cases of tea would be equivalent today of, or at the time, of 90,000 English pounds financially. Okay, if you were to translate that to money today, it is approximately $1 million worth of tea. All right, so when you throw tea leaves into water, all right, they're done. Okay, so this wasn't again a means of making money for the colonists and the Sons of Liberty. This was to show Britain that they're willing, all right, to lose all this money. If you guys had ever seen the movie The Dark Knight, all right, there's a scene with the Joker. He burns all the piles of cash there. Okay, that's essentially what the colonists are doing here, the Sons of Liberty. Okay, they are wasting $1 million worth of tea. I read something, I think last year in some sort of journal, that the amount of tea that was thrown in there could have filled up over 18 million tea bags. All right, so when you think about it, that's a crazy amount of tea, and certainly something like that is not going to sit very well with King George and Parliament back in England. So what we'll do on Wednesday is after we take our quiz on Section 2, okay, we'll continue to talk about the Boston Tea Party. I don't want to get too far ahead. I do want to be in class for some of those descriptions there. All right, so we'll get into that on Wednesday. Okay, so you should have a little bit of classwork and Schoology to work on. Please feel free to do so. All right, those due dates there in Schoology to be checked. As a reminder, we do have a quiz on Wednesday on section 2, so everything up to the Committee of Correspondence will be on your quiz. All right, and then tomorrow we'll watch a little thing on the Boston Massacre and Tea Party in class. So please make sure that you are quietly working on your material. All right, if you've already completed those assignments in study hall, please feel free to start studying for your quiz on Wednesday. All right, as always, make sure that you say thank you to your sub. Make sure you're on your best behavior. Yes, that means I am talking to you in the front. And please make sure that you have an excellent day. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'll see you all on Tuesday afternoon. Take care.